This is a Sichos from Likutei Sichos, Chelek Gimel, Chag Shavuos Sicha Beis, and the topic of the Sicha is that on Shavuos there's a greater emphasis on eating and drinking good food than on all other Yom Tevim. And there are three parts to the Sicha. The Rebbe will, number one, ask why this is so. Number two, explain the general idea of having physical pleasure on Shabbos and Yom Tov in general. And number three, based on this, answer our original question. So in other words, once we understand why the Torah tells us to have physical pleasure on Shabbos and Yom Tov in general, then we'll understand why on Shavuos there's even a greater emphasis on having the physical pleasure. The Yom Tov of Shavuos is different than the other Yom Tevim in that, in the words of the Gemara, Hakol Meidim Batzeres the Ba'ina Nami Lachem. Everyone agrees that on Shavuos you also need to have Lachem, and we'll explain what this means. My timer, what's the reason? Because Yom Shenitna B'Teirahu. It's the day that the Torah was given. So what does this mean? So by the other Yom Tevim, there's an argument whether one may behave in a way of Kulil Hashem, meaning that the person devotes the whole day to serving Hashem, and a person doesn't have any physical pleasure on Yom Tov, or, as another opinion says, one must behave in a way of Chetzi Lachem. A person also has to have physical pleasure on the day. So that's regarding all other Yom Tevim. But not so by Shavuos, where everyone agrees, in the words of the Gemara, De'bo'inon nami lachem, we also need lachem, meaning, as Rashi says, Sheyismach bei b'meichel u'mishte lahar shenechem u'kubel yom zeh liyisrael shenitna Torah bei, that a person has to be joyful on the day of Shavuos by eating and drinking to show that this day is pleasant and acceptable to us, this day that the Torah was given on. So we see that there's a difference between Shavuos and all other Yom Tevim in that on Shavuos everyone agrees that a person has to have physical pleasure. However, by other Yom Tevim, there's an argument. Now, also according to the halacha, that by all Yom Tevim, not just by Shavuos, we paskin like the opinion that by all Yom Tevim, one must behave in a way of Chetzi Lachem. Nevertheless, there is still a difference between Shavuos and all other Yom Tevim, and that is that by the other Yom Tevim, the din is that one may fast the Tainas Chalem. If a person had a bad dream and they want to mitigate the negative effects of the bad dream, they're allowed to fast the Tainas Chalem. And the reason is because even though there is a chiyuv of Einig Shabbos v'Yom Tov, however, since, and the words of the Alter Rebbe, Nafshei Aguma al Chalemer, the person's heart, the person's distressed about their dream, im kain, if so, a tainis hu einig lei. So then the fast is pleasure for this person. And so this is the way that this person is having einig. However, not so by Shavuos. Since, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, tzarech lechol v'lismayach bei, that a person has to eat and be happy on it. Laharas, to show shenechem ukubel Yisrael, yom shenitna b'yatera, to show that it's pleasant and acceptable to the Yidden, this day that the Torah was given on, and therefore one is not allowed to fast the Tainas Chalem. Meaning that on Chag Shavuos there's a chiyuv specifically for achila, and it can't be done in any other way, like on Shabbos and Yom Tov, where a person can have their einig through fasting for a Tainas Chalem. Now this is a great difficulty, because the Yom Tevim of Pesach and Sukkot, they commemorate, for the most part, mainly physical acts of kindness. On Pesach, the freedom from the slavery of Mitzrayim, and on Sukkot, the protection of the Anonei Kavod while the Yidden were in the desert. And nevertheless, there can be a situation by them that their chiyuv of einig is performed not through a physical feast, not through eating, but rather on the contrary, through the opposite, through fasting, in the case of a Tainas Chalem. And specifically by Chag Shavuos, which is Yom Shenitna B'Torah, the day that the Torah was given, which is entirely a spiritual kindness, there the Einig Yom Tov must always be connected to physically eating, and therefore one may not fast the Tainas Chalem. How do we make sense of this? And the reason for this halacha is, and it's for this very reason, because it's Nitna B'Torah, the Torah was given, which is entirely a spiritual kindness. So how do we make sense that by the other Yom Tevim, Pesach and Sukkot, that they primarily commemorate something physical, a person could celebrate in some instances, not through physical pleasure. Whereas Shavuos, which is entirely a spiritual kindness, there a person must always celebrate through having physical pleasure. So in order to understand this, we must first explain the general gather of Chiyuv Einig Shabbos v'Yom Tov, not getting into the differences between on one hand Pesach and Sukkot, as well as Shabbos, and on the other hand Shavuos, but the general gather of Chiyuv Einig Shabbos v'Yom Tov. So the main Chiyuv Einig Shabbos v'Yom Tov is specifically through eating and drinking. And therefore the din is that even though one may v'ast the Tainas Chalem on Shabbos v'Yom Tov, as we said, nevertheless, one who did fast has to fast again on a weekday for a kapara for doing this. The person has to fast another fast for fasting on Shabbos and Yom Tov. They need a kapara for doing this. And this is because by fasting a Tainas Chalem, one canceled the Iker Einig Shabbos. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, Bittul Iker Einig Shabbos. Now furthermore, the heter to fast on Shabbos for Yom Tov is only by a Tainas Chalem, or for a person who, as we'll mention later, Achil b'Shabbos tsar hulei, eating on Shabbos is painful for the person. However, a fast for another reason, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, filu machmas tshuva v'chasidus, even if a person is doing it for tshuva, to repent, or chasidus, for piety, and by this person, yeshlei tainug b'tainazeh, this person has pleasure in this fast, so such a fast is usher. And this is because, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, ein le lahachlef einik chachamim shetiknu begimel sudais, a person doesn't have the authority, a person doesn't have the ability to exchange, to switch the pleasure that the Chachamim established. They were masakin to have 3 meals, but einig acher with a different pleasure. She'enei muchach shia b'Shabbos, that doesn't have to be on Shabbos. Now we have to understand, because since the din oinig is not about the eating itself, but rather for the oinig in it, for the pleasure in it, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, mitzvah su'udei Shabbos, the mitzvah of making sudas on Shabbos, eina ela b'shvil oinig, it's only for the oinig, for the pleasure. To the extent that oinig Shabbos for Yom Tov is considered a mitzvah, which in the words of the Alter Rebbe is tuluya b'das adam. It is totally, it depends on each person. And as we see that a person may fast the tainus chalaim because a tainus oinig loib, for this reason, that the tainus, the fast, is an oinig for this person. If so, why did the Chachamim originally establish that the chiyuv oinig should be specifically through eating? And that therefore, one may not exchange oinig chachamim ba'oinig acher. Seemingly, there shouldn't be any established rule for everyone. Rather, each person should fulfill the mitzvah of oinig with what they get pleasure from. Now, true, the pleasure of most people is from eating and drinking, and more specifically, eating meat and drinking wine. However, this doesn't preclude that by a minority of people, something else, for example, those who get pleasure from a tainus of tshuva, that shouldn't be their pleasure. The explanation is, Torah mitzvahs were given to Yidden specifically the way we are in the Shamas Begufim. Where Ava Eim Yesh B'nechem, as Moshe Rabbeinu told the Malachim when they claimed that they should receive the Torah, one of the things he said to them was, Ava Eim Yesh B'nechem, do you have a father and a mother? Meaning that Torah is meant for the Shamas Begufim where there's a father and a mother and all the other physical things. The reason for this is because the tikkun that mitzvahs accomplish on the person, as Rizal say, that's the purpose of the Torah mitzvahs. The mitzvahs were only given for the purpose of uplifting and refining the brias. That tikkun is not for the neshama, because a neshama atzma ain't a tzricha tikkun. The neshama itself doesn't need a tikkun, but rather for the guf, meaning that also the guf should be permeated with the kedusha of mitzvahs. And from this it's understood that when the Torah says that Shabbos for Yom Tov has to be a time of einik for Yidden, it doesn't mean that only the neshama should have pleasure from Shabbos and Yom Tov, but rather that also the guf, and especially the guf, should feel pleasure from it being Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, since the natural tainig of the guf is through eating and drinking, so therefore the Torah says that the chiyuv einig is specifically through eating. It's specifically in this way that it accomplishes that the einig Shabbos v'Yom Tov permeates the guf. However, a tainus of tshuva is not an einig for the guf. And even when a yid worked on himself, that his guf shouldn't feel pain from a tainus, or even more so, that his guf should feel pleasure from a tainus, like the idea of shmua toiva tadashin otzem, meaning that a spiritual experience affects the person's physical body, but nevertheless, this is not an einig that comes from the guf itself. It's not that this is the gedder of the guf to get pleasure from this. Rather, this einig of the guf comes from the control of the neshama over the guf that this person has either naturally or because of the avodah that they did. And this is contrary to the nature of the guf, even a guf tzaruf v'kadish, even of a guf of a holy person. And therefore, one may not fast such a tainus of tshuva, even when yesh le tainig b'tainus that this person has pleasure from this tainus. Rather, one must have einig on Shabbos v'Yom Tov specifically through eating and drinking, which they are the einig of the guf. And this is exactly why the din is that even by a tainus chaleim, which is permitted for a person to fast, one needs a kapara for fasting this tainus chaleim on Shabbos, because one was mevatled by doing this, the ikar einig of Shabbos. So now we're going to present a side point. So v'yesh leimer, we can explain that this is also the reason in Remez why in Shas it only says the heter for fasting on Shabbos and Yom Tov for a tainus chaleim. In Shulchan Aruch it mentions additional instances where there's a heter to fast on Shabbos. For example, Adam sha'achila mazekas lay, a person that eating harms them, she'oz einig huloi shelei la'achol, because then it's an einig for them not to eat. Or someone who is used to fasting every day and eating on Shabbos is tsar huloi, it's painful for them in pnei shinui veses because it's a change of their habit. So from this it's understood that the din of tainus chaleim is the foundation for the heter in all other cases, since that's the one case that's brought in Shas. It's from the din of tainus chaleim that we learn that the mitzvah of einig on Shabbos and Yom Tov is not eating for itself, but rather for the einig of it. And therefore, when a person gets einig from not eating, one may fast. we can explain that the reason Chazal chose to say the heter specifically by a tainas chalaim is in order to hint that the possibility for a heter to fast on Shabbos is from a person being in a state of a chalaim ruchni, which is the shena, the helim, and the golus of the neshama and the guf, and from the actual golus itself. As it's explained in Torah, so in Torah it says in the pasuk of Ayinu Kilchelmim that just like a dream connects two opposites in one thing, because when a person is sleeping, the koyach ha-seichel is gone, and the only thing that remains is the koyach ha-medame, the imagination. So the same thing is also in the time of Golus, that because of the Helam and Hester of the Golus, it's possible they could have two opposite things by the person. That when the person is davening, the person is in a truest eirus and making achlatos tevis, and it's all real and true. And then after the davening, it should be completely forgotten. So much so that the person can behave in a way that's completely opposite than the way they decided that the achlata they made by davening. Because how is it possible that there should be such a thing by a Yid, that their body should stop them from having pleasure from eating on Shabbos or Yom Tov, when it's a mitzvah to have pleasure in that way? And we're not talking about someone who does the opposite of Torah, chas v'shalom, but rather about someone who is trying to behave according to the Torah. And nevertheless, his guf isn't ready to receive this type of einig, the einig of achil and shtia. How is it possible if that's what the Torah wants? It's only because he is in a state of a chalim. He is indeed a Yid who lives according to the Torah. However, nevertheless, there is a hester that doesn't allow the einig of Shabbos to permeate him to the extent that also his guf should properly recognize that it's Shabbos. If this person didn't have this hester, then the vayikatsheyu of the day would affect his body. That on this day, he will have einig from eating, even though he feels differently the rest of the week and year, since Shabbos is a day that brings einig in all areas. Now, another point over here is that it's only because Torah seeks to help and find solutions also for a person who is in a state of a chalaim, that the Torah over here is offering the person this option to fast for a tainas chalaim, or for whatever other reason that's permitted. As it says that the effect of Torah is lahavdil ben atomei uben atayr, because seemingly they are two opposites, Tameh and Tahir. So why does one need the Torah for it? It's because the lesson and support of Torah is also for such a person who is in a state of Shena and a Chalaim, and therefore this person is able to mix up two opposites like Tameh and Tahir, and they need the Torah lahavdil ben Tameh ben Tahir. And therefore the Torah gives a solution to a person whose hester in his guf stops him from eating on Shabbos and Yom Tov. The Torah allows him to fast, since in his current state, this is his einig. According to all this, we can understand the difference between Shavuos and all other Yom Tevim. The Chiddush in the Zgalus Alikis at the time of Matan Torah, compared to the other Galuyim on the other Yom Tevim, is that by Matan Torah it permeated the whole world. As it says that the sound of Matan Torah was heard from all four directions, from above and from below, to the extent that Sibur Leitzavach Sharlei Ga Ha'olam Sheisik Amachrish, the whole world was quiet. That means it impacted the whole world. Furthermore, the sound of the Aseres Adibris became absorbed even in the daimim of the world. As spoken once at length, that this is why there wasn't any echo from the sound of the Aseres Adibris, because it became absorbed in the world. An echo happens because the sound bounces off the object. However, by Matan Torah, the sound penetrated the physical world. And the reason for this is because by Matan Torah there was the Zgalus, the revelation of Atzmos Mahus himself, that he put himself in the Torah. As Chazal say, that the word Anechi, which is the start of the Aseres Adibris, is the Rosh Tevas of Anon, Nafshi, Ksovas, Yehovis. That Anechi, Misha Anechi, Atzmos himself, says that he is giving his Atzmos, Nafshi, in Torah. Now, since he is the true Bligvul, so there's no place where his Izgalus doesn't reach, and therefore Matan Torah permeated the whole of creation. And according to this, it's also understood the reason one may not fast the Tainas Chalim and Chag HaShavuos, for the reason that it is Yom Shednitna B'Torah Torah, because the Torah was given on that day. Since Chag HaShavuos is the Yom Shednitna B'Torah Torah, which permeated the whole of creation without any limit. So therefore, also the Simcha of Chag HaShavuos has to also be limitless in a way that there isn't any place by the person where this Simcha doesn't reach. By other Yom Tevim, since they are connected with Eiros V'Giluyim, different levels of Lakus, so therefore there's the possibility for a Hester of the Chalaim which obstructs and conceals the Simcha of Yom Tov. However, there isn't any possibility for any Hester on the Simcha of Torah. Rather, it permeates all levels. Even the lowest level recognizes how Matan Torah is noyach u'makubal, and therefore this even comes into the Olam HaChaleimes in eating,